Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming. We are talking once again about Curseborne, because one of the questions I've been asked a fair amount since we launched the Kickstarter, since the Kickstarter funded even, is what do I fight against in Curseborne? This is an interesting question because it's something that comes up in a lot of RPGs. It's something that I first encountered, I suppose, when I first looked at the World of Darkness. Players would want to know, okay, so this is an interesting character, but what exactly am I fighting against? And I think it's because we traditionally see stories, RPGs, through a certain D&D adventuring lens, where not only is there a task to accomplish, there is also often a villain, a monster, some god to slay at the end of it. And while I disagree with that entire premise, I think that a story can be perfectly satisfactory, indeed more than satisfactory, by simply solving a mystery or coming to a diplomatic resolution to a problem, or through elevation of your character's status and various other paths. The monster slaying side of things, the god killing side of things, is just as valid a method of play in Curseborne as any other game. And when people would ask it in Vampire the Masquerade, for example, they would often be looking for a common enemy because they couldn't think of a good reason why characters would work together unless they were seeking to, well, murder something together, which is a very odd psychology, isn't it? And I don't feel Curseborne really has that same issue, because mechanically your characters are bonded together, and therefore not only are you able to give each other enhancements on actions, you are also linked through a written relationship with each other. Therefore, you're going to come to depend on each other. You may even like each other. You will certainly respect each other, even if you don't necessarily share the same apartment, the same bed, or the same street. But I think the coming together to defeat a mutual foe is a tried and tested plot beat that, as I say, is valid in Curseborne and I think is worth exploration. So to get to the original question of what do I fight against in Curseborne, well, there's a lot of potential adversaries in this game. I co-wrote and largely developed the adversaries chapter for this game. Therefore, I've got a fair idea of the kind of creatures you could be going up against, the kind of cursed entities you could be facing, and they're not always people, they're not always monsters, they're not always critters, sometimes they are places. Our adversaries come in 5 different templates, which I'm sure I will now struggle to recall, with Shiver being lowest, Fright, I think it's then Terror, I want to say, Nightmare, and finally Shattered Spaces, which are roughly equivalent somewhere between Terrors and Nightmares. Those first 4 tend to apply to either thinking, sapient, active antagonist types. The shattered space tends to be a place, an object, a location that a character might get trapped in where environmental effects are many, but there are still methods of destroying them. And those tiers are a little like, I suppose, power levels, and they're only advisory. For instance, a Shiver has a lower primary dice pool than a Terror or a Fright, indeed. And a Nightmare has a higher Desperation pool than the equivalent in the Terror or Fright or Shiver camp. But you can adjust them as you see fit as the story guide. Those templates are only guidelines, and the various adversaries that are detailed in the adversaries chapter of Curseborne sometimes do skew outside of those templates. As I say, the templates are guidelines, they are not prerequisites, they are not obligatory. And each of those templates suggests a certain number of qualities and a certain number of dread powers. Now, qualities are the supernatural aspects that make up your character. They tend to be passive abilities, always on is another way to put it. Often defensive, sometimes ambient, and they might be something like natural weapons or a creature's ability to make the world around them I guess, act in a specific atmospheric or emotive way. This is a character's permanent aura. This is a weapon they cannot remove. This is what their qualities are. And qualities will rarely be game-changing for the player characters that are going up against these adversaries with these qualities, but they are mechanical as well as flavour. The dread powers are where it gets interesting, because the dread powers are abilities that typically exist in finite amounts for each adversary. They can use them X number of times per scene, and once again, depending on the tier of the adversary's template, they will have more and more and more access, sometimes access to certain dread powers that they didn't have access to at lower tiers. These are all laid out for each adversary that is detailed in the chapter. Now, what kind of examples are we talking about? Well, this is the ability to get into someone's mind and manipulate them. This is the ability to, for instance, issue a kind of breath weapon. This is the ability to spawn or summon more monsters. This is the ability to, I don't know, let's go a bit further. Do things like spread disease or and such. This is something that you don't want your adversary doing over and over and over again passively. This is something you want them to do actively, maybe once, maybe twice in a scene. And I've seen some people look at the numbers that we attribute to certain dread powers and say, that doesn't seem like much. Like, we might have a character that can bend minds once per scene, but scenes have variable length, and you genuinely don't want an adversary to be hammering the same ability over and over again, otherwise they're not terribly interesting, which is why it's more interesting to give them a range of possibilities that the story guide then has to time as to their use. What's more, a lot of those dread powers aren't just powers that the adversary can snap their fingers and activate. Often they're tied to complications, which is to say they are reactive powers. An adversary can hit you as much as they like with their natural weapons, or shoot at you with their gun or whatever it is they're armed with. They may even try to talk to you or intimidate you or run away from you. But some of those dread powers, the reactive ones, they will be lying in wait, and they are reactive based on certain contingencies. This is all written into each of the dread powers. So, for example, a dread power may be reactive based on an attack. So your player character attacks the adversary, and not only do they have to overcome the adversary's defense, they also have to overcome the adversary's complication. This complication will vary depending on the tier of the adversary. If they can't overcome the complication, which is going to be rated 1 to 3, minor to major, well, their dread power will react and basically attack you in turn in some interesting way. Now, the kinds of adversaries you're going to be facing, I mentioned things like the X-Files, I mentioned Stephen King and various other media creators, genres in other videos, but that's really what you're looking at here. You're going to have games where you're tracking down mundane serial killers or accursed serial killers, kidnappers, thieves, other miscreants and criminals. You're going to be looking at monsters that might be... I think we've got a kind of mollusk that replaces the tongue of its host. It's a kind of parasite, all the way through to huge gargoyles and fluke monsters, because I do love a big wormy monster, and a Knuckleavy and so forth. basically pure demonic entities exist alongside your more mundane. Because to use that X-Files example again, sometimes you want episodes, games that are based around hunting a monster or identifying what monster has been harassing your local community or has kidnapped someone close to you, maybe someone who is on your contacts list on your character sheet, for example. And in a case like that, you can just as easily go for a dead Clype. Dead Clype is essentially an antagonistic one of the dead. There is an antagonistic variant of every single lineage in the core book, in the Adversaries chapter, who may have possessed your friend and walked them off somewhere or put them in great peril, all the way through to something more monstrous and inhuman, like, let's say, our parasite, our underground dwelling host, to use the X-Files example. So you've got a nice range. Now, does that answer the question of what do I fight against? Well, I don't know, because it's one thing to have monsters coming up every now and then, or having your game be set around your characters being investigation-seeking, mystery-seeking, accursed, who occasionally run afoul of horrible beasts. But I think it's worth looking at the family structures too when you're seeking out adversaries. What you're best served doing, much as with the World or Chronicles of Darkness or any urban fantasy game or kitchen sink game, is looking to a character's family, where you want to identify the people who are antagonistic to them, the people who apply obligations to them, the people who might cause them shame, the people who may have betrayed them in some way. So games can get quite political. They don't always have to be about knockdown, drag-out combat. Your adversaries may be your parents, your uncle, your grandparents, the people who have put you in this position, or the people who have embarrassed you or otherwise you need to remove to rehabilitate your good name, or indeed your family's good name. So adversaries can come across, I guess, multiple axes in the game of Curseborne. You're looking at adversaries from a, I guess, battlefield style of you are facing this creature in the woods and now you need to beat Resurrection Jake or Red Riding Hood, for example, because both are in there. Or they may be in the boardroom, they may be in court, so to speak, or a gallery or a family gathering. Adversaries can come in many different shapes, whether it's political and social or whether it's physical and threatening. And Curseborne is deliberately, I suppose I would describe it as flexible in that regard. It is there to cater to multiple styles of play. So when someone asks me, what do I fight against in Curseborne? Well, I could answer, well, what do you got? But the true question is, well, what would you like to be fighting against in this game? What kind of stories do you want to tell? Now, a lot of players are going to say, I leave that up to you. You're the story guide, and that's fine by me. I'll put a mix of things in. But I would hasten to add, and I will do so now, that your games should not be just one thing. Try and mix things up a little. Try and draw a little in from different aspects of the world. Have an encounter with a Battleforged or Painful.love or Peaborgs, for example, which are uniquely monstrous creatures or entities corrupted by the outside. And this is another part of the adversary's adventure, I guess, in Curseborne, all the way through to the more mundane sorceress tyrant. Well, is there anything mundane about a sorcerer? Or hungry parasite, or primal predator? The whole point being that the adversaries chapter in Curseborne is extensive, and I would be amazed if you couldn't find something or someone, because there's named characters in there as well, that you will want to use for your games. You can use adversaries to provide direction if the players won't provide it, and I think having a game where you are playing that political jockeying, where you are trying to win status for yourself within your family, and let's say your rival, you discover, is in league with an Archon from the outside, and therefore your rival from the Sphinx family is helping Battleforged, these creatures that have been spawned or created, corrupted by the outside, to basically seep into your reality. So now you have the political aspect, but you also have the mutation, the physical, the threatening aspect mixed together. In short, and I know this is a real cop-out answer, your adversaries can be whatever you want. The book has a ridiculous number, so go wild and choose the one you're interested in. And if you've already read the Curseborne manuscript, because of course if you backed Curseborne on Kickstarter, or if you pre-order it through BackerKit when it becomes available, you will get access to the entire manuscript. Do take a look at the Adversaries chapter. I will be very interested to hear which adversaries appeal to you. Which ones could you see yourself building an entire story around? Which ones would you want to use for one-shots, Monster of the Week style adventures? And I guess what I would also like to see is what kind of monsters would you like to see in a game like Curseborne? If your inspiration is Buffy or Supernatural or the X-Files, what would you like to see in Curseborne to make you want to give it a go? So do let me know in the comments below, and thank you very much for watching.